A murder shakes a small police station on the coast of Alaska. A 19-year-old young woman has been found dead. Her body lay in the mud. The perpetrator was tough and clever. He knew how to leave no traces. During the investigation, one of the suspects even frightened the police. The officers felt not only in danger, but also feared that their families were at risk. Everyone was convinced that the next victim could be anyone if they didn't catch the murderer. Nome, in the state of Alaska, is a small settlement 1,000 kilometers northwest of Anchorage, surrounded by impassable mountains and the rough waters of the Bering Sea. The 3,000 inhabitants of the town rely on their neighbors in all matters. Nome is a very friendly town, an ideal place where the crime rate is about half the national average. For the 7 members of the police, the biggest challenge was arresting drunks. But that changed in the summer of 2003. It all began on August 12th with a missing person report filed by Sonya Ivanoff's roommate, Tim Meyer-Tavarik. She hadn't seen her for 2 days. On the night of August 10th to 11th, Tim Meyer and Sonya went to a friend's house and played board games. Tim Meyer couldn't stay out long because she had to work at 6 a.m. the next day, and Sonya had to leave. She wanted to visit her other friends. Eventually, Tim Meyer fell asleep on her friend's couch, woke up early around 5 a.m., and took a taxi home. Sonya was not there. She didn't have to go to work. Tim Meyer decided to call her later and headed to work. Throughout the day, she didn't hear from Sonya. Her friend began to worry. She started calling mutual friends to ask where she might be. They said they knew nothing. Sonya wasn't the type of person who would just leave the house without telling anyone where she was going and why. She always reported everything. It was really strange for her loved ones not to know where she was. The day after Tim Meyer filed a missing person report, the police took a photo of Sonya and began searching for her. 3 hours later, a volunteer involved in the search discovered something in the bushes on an old road 3 kilometers north of the city. Naturally, the police officers immediately thought it could be Sonya. They approached the crime scene through the bushes to reach her without trampling the area where the perpetrator had probably passed. After examining the body, police officer Byron Redburn concluded that it was the 19-year-old Sonya Ivanoff. He had been at many crime scenes and noted that most of them were characterized by obvious disorder, but this one was not so striking. He couldn't find any injuries on the body. She was wearing only a single sock. Therefore, the officers assumed that she had been raped. Additionally, there were tree leaves on the body. The police searched the area and collected everything that might have been carried away by the wind. They found tire tracks on a pool of blood, and it was clearly visible where the wheel had rolled. It was the first time in 2.5 years that a woman had been killed in this area, and at that moment, they realized they were understaffed. There were only 7 police officers in this town, and they had to maintain order around the clock. They needed help, so the Nome police turned to the Alaska Bureau of Investigation for assistance. However, their criminal analyst was not due to arrive until the next morning. In the meantime, the police officers had to secure the crime scene. As a precaution, Police Chief Taylor and his subordinate Owens volunteered to take over the entire night shift. Redburn had to tell the young woman's family what had happened. This news is the worst there is. No one wants to hear something like that. Her mother couldn't believe what had happened. She kept asking herself who could have come up with the idea of murdering such a beautiful, open, and cheerful person. Sonya had recently moved from a small village to Nome to save money for college. Her roommate Tim Meyer was her best friend since childhood. They were inseparable and could even finish each other's sentences. True best friends, as close as friends can be. When Sonya arrived in Nome, she was already a local celebrity. She was a top athlete. Beautiful, tall, strong, and powerful. Everyone knew her because people are interested in those who are successful in sports, and Sonya was very good at basketball. The next morning, forensic technician Carrie Cathart from the Alaska Bureau of Investigation arrived at the crime scene. The task of a forensic technician is to photograph everything, sketch the crime scene, note the evidence that needs to be collected, and document it. They also assess who might have committed the crime. This means abstracting from the gruesome spectacle of violence and viewing everything from an analytical perspective to understand what happened and what physical evidence can be obtained. The road where Sonya's body was found was lined with bushes on both sides. The deserted road led nowhere, and there were hardly any cars to be seen. However, there were fresh tire tracks. Carrie Cathcart examined them carefully. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just mud on the road. But then she saw that there was a blood trail in the middle, over which a car had driven. The driver then turned around, found a dead end ahead, and therefore drove back. She tested the blood with a special test that doctors use to detect blood in urine. The theory was confirmed. Initially, the police thought the victim had been injured on this road. They were sure that Sonya had lain there for a while, even if only briefly, and lost a lot of blood. She was then carried into the bushes and undressed. This theory was confirmed when Carrie examined the area around the woman's body and found almost no blood. Additionally, there were no abrasions on the body. If the murderer had first undressed Sonya and then moved the body, there would have been scratches. Carrie also noticed deep bruises on the woman's face. Maybe there was a struggle. Perhaps Sonya didn't want to do what the perpetrator demanded, and he became angry. The officers examined the body thoroughly to see if it held any evidence, but that was not the case. However, they collected material from the body using adhesive tape to search for unobtrusive particles. When Carrie lifted her head, she saw a gunshot wound under her hair. It was probably the cause of death, but there were no shell casings nearby. The police searched the area, but found neither clothing nor weapons. There was practically nothing left at the crime scene, indicating that the perpetrator knew how to eliminate evidence. He was very cautious and knew how to clean the crime scene, but overlooked the tire tracks. The investigators made casts of the clear tracks, the same thing dentists do to mold dentures. The tire impressions were then sent to forensics. Nearby, the officers found another piece of evidence. On a tree near the road, they noticed blue car paint on one of the branches. Only an off-road vehicle or a truck could have hit such a high branch. While the paint was being analyzed in the lab, the police analyzed the collected information. First, the murderer most likely drove a blue car. Second, he knew how to erase his tracks. Third, such a gruesome discovery only 3 kilometers from the town meant that Nome was no longer safe. The tire examination revealed that the perpetrator's truck had 3 identical tires and one of a different type. Additionally, it was found that a number of trucks and SUVs are painted in this specific shade of blue. While investigators searched for vehicles matching the tire tracks, Byron Redburn went to Sonya's neighbor Tim Meyer. He asked her to show him Sonya's belongings because he thought he might find a clue or new information in them. As Redburn flipped through Sonya's photo album, a picture caught his attention. He noticed a photo of the woman who had a large bruise on her arm. Tim Meyer explained that a friend of theirs had done this. The two had many friends who often visited them. They watched movies together and sometimes wrestled playfully. One of the men had left this bruise. His name was Andrew Donnelly, but everyone in town called him Donnie. Redburn knew that the guy was in love with Sonya, and then he saw this bruise. That was very suggestive. Redburn immediately summoned Donnie for questioning. Donnie said he had liked Sonya very much and was sorry about what had happened to her. He said he couldn't have killed her because he was out of town hunting at the time. He said he was several kilometers from Nome, where he and his friends were camping. The officers spoke with his friends, who confirmed that they were indeed out hunting, but that Donnie had spent the night separately, so they couldn't be certain that he had been there all night and hadn't gone anywhere. That meant Donnie could have traveled the 170 kilometers to Nome, killed Sonya, and then returned to the hunting camp unnoticed. The officers needed to scrutinize Donnie more closely. The next day, the police obtained a search warrant for his house. There, Redburn found sneakers stained with blood. Donnie's car, a blue pickup truck, was parked in the garage, and the police immediately recalled the blue paint at the crime scene. When they examined the vehicle, they found a blue object in the back of the truck that showed many stains. Carrie Cathcart conducted a test that indicated it was very likely blood. When they sprayed the tires with a special substance, a conspicuous green glow appeared. Behind the driver's seat, they found a hunting rifle, and one of the gun stocks had a stain, presumably also blood. When you see blood on a firearm, on the tarp, and on the wheel of a truck, you begin to suspect that the owner is indeed involved in a crime. When the tires of the pickup were examined, it turned out that the fourth tire was different from the other three, just like the car that had been driven near the crime scene. The entire police force was sure it was him. It just had to be proven. Despite the mounting evidence, Donnie still claimed he had nothing to do with Sonya's murder. He said he had shot a porcupine, and the blood in the truck was from it. Additionally, he had run over a rabbit. The rabbit was still alive, so Donnie got out and stomped on it with his foot to put it out of its misery. When Carrie Cathcart heard this explanation, it seemed ridiculous to her. Then came the results from the forensic lab. The blood found on Donnie's sneakers, the tarp, the tires, and the shotgun came from animals, and the paint on his pickup did not match the paint on the branch found at the crime scene. If this had happened in the 60s or 70s, Donnie would have gone straight to jail for the murder of Sonya Ivanoff, but the forensic analysis proved that he wasn't the one. At the same time, an autopsy was conducted. The x-rays showed that Sonya had been shot in the skull with a .22 caliber bullet. She had been shot at close range, almost in the back of the head, like an execution, and this was the cause of death. No skin particles were found under Sonya's fingernails, and there were also no signs of rape. When a naked body is found, officers always assume that a fluid exchange most likely occurred. In such cases, a DNA sample is enough, and the case is solved, but this time they found nothing. The adhesive tape samples also yielded nothing. When an object comes into contact with another, hairs and fibers are transferred. If the police had found the clothing, there could have been more evidence. Almost a month after Sonya's death, the search for her missing clothing led investigators to the Nome landfill. Many people came to help, but they found nothing at the landfill and soon gave up the location. When the investigation had almost come to a standstill, a call came into the station that led the police officers onto an unpleasant trail. A witness claimed to have seen Sonya Ivanoff before her disappearance. In August 2003, 7 members of the Nome Police Department faced a big problem. A ruthless murderer had killed Sonya Ivanoff and left almost no traces. Since there are hardly any strangers in this close-knit community, the locals were convinced that the murderer was one of their own. They inundated the police with messages. It was unimaginable. No one believed or wanted to believe that something so brutal could happen in such a small town. The most important new lead came from a woman named Allison Warren. She reported that she and her sister had seen Sonya on the night she disappeared after midnight. They were at home and saw her. The two sisters chatted with her for a while in front of the house. Then Sonya went on. At the corner, a police car stopped in front of her. The sisters saw that the window of the car was rolled down. The driver and Sonya were obviously talking, and then she got into the police car. So there were 3 people who saw Sonya before her disappearance: the 2 sisters and the driver of the car. Instead of turning west and taking her home, the police car drove in the other direction. In that direction, there was nothing but a highway leading to the deserted area where Sonya's body was found. The women found this strange and tried to recall the time. It was already August 11th, 1:26 a.m. In Nome, the number of suspects had narrowed from the town's 3,000 inhabitants to 7 police officers. Of course, they didn't want one of their own to turn out to be the murderer. The officers didn't know how that was possible. Why would one of them do it? To solve the mystery, they first had to find out who was on duty that night. It turned out that only 2 officers were on duty that night: Paul Sousa and Matthew Owens. Matt Owens came from Florida and joined the police force 3 years ago. He was a firearms expert and trained other police officers in the use of firearms. Paul Sousa grew up in Nome, was a referee in Sonya's basketball team, and had worked in prison for several years. The officers knew he came from a good local family. Paul and Matt were both reputable police officers who worked tirelessly to solve Sonya's murder. But if one of them was the murderer, it would explain why there was almost no evidence at the crime scene. At the police academy, they teach how to collect evidence. Graduates know where and how to look. The average citizen wouldn't think of such places and objects, something you don't see in police series. Paul and Matt claimed they hadn't picked up Sonya, but if the witnesses were telling the truth, then one of the officers was lying. 26 days after Sonya's body was found, the case was handed over to the Alaska State Police. Eric Barrow, an investigator with 5 years of experience, had to find out if one of the police officers from Nome was a cold-blooded murderer. First, he wanted to find out where Paul and Matt were at 1:26 a.m. when Sonya got into a police car. Matt Owens claimed he was at a bar on the other side of town to watch the end of the night. However, he wasn't seen there until 2 a.m. No one knew where Matt was during the specific times. Paul Sousa said he had spent most of the night at the station writing a report, but he couldn't prove his activity during that specific time either. So Barrow asked both to take a lie detector test, but not at the Nome police station, where the whole town would find out. They wanted to conduct the interrogation in Anchorage to avoid undermining the officers' credibility by treating them as suspects. They could undergo the lie detector test and prove their innocence. In that case, the officers could calmly drop their suspicion and continue the investigation wherever it led. But 8 hours before the men were to depart for Anchorage, patrol car 321 was stolen from the police parking lot. That was a disaster. A lot of important and expensive equipment was transported in this car, and shotguns were also stored there. A shotgun in the hands of an unknown person roaming the town posed a real danger. All emergency forces were put on high alert. 2 hours later, a police officer sent an urgent radio message to the dispatcher. He reported over the radio that he had found car 321, paused for a moment, and then shouted that he was being shot at. Deputy Matt Owens had been shot. Redburn immediately drove to his aid in the old mine. When the man got out of the vehicle, he heard nothing. There was complete silence. Patrol car 321 was there, but no one was around. Then Owens emerged from the darkness. He appeared unharmed. The officer said he had been attacked and had to hide. He couldn't see the shooter well. Matt gave no details, no description of the suspect, or where he went, practically nothing. The location of the shooting was not far from the old road where Sonya had been left. The officers searched all night until dawn, but found no one. A forensic scientist from the Alaska State Lab discovered something strange at the scene. One of the patrol car's windows had been smashed, and on the seat lay an envelope and a swimming pass in the name of Sonya Ivanoff. This item was not mentioned in the police reports. No one could know that the ID was missing, yet it was there. This suggests that the person who stole the car is the murderer. The investigators couldn't figure out if the murderer was playing with them or had something to say. Then Carrie Cathart opened the envelope she had found and discovered a note. Some sentences immediately caught her eye. Pigs. I hate police officers. I hate everyone. It was very easy to take the car keys. It's not their fault. It's their fault she got caught. It's unlikely that someone would steal a police car to leave a note and report a murder unless the police were getting too close to him. The note and the pass were sent to a lab to be tested for DNA and fingerprints, but just like at the crime scene and with the body, no evidence was found. The note was given to an FBI forensic psychologist for analysis, who shared his assessment with the investigators in Alaska. The man stated that the murderer mentioned Sonya's name, indicating that he knew the victim. The wording suggested that he wanted to kill and did so. The letter made it clear that he was ready to kill anyone who pursued him. I leave you alone, and you leave me alone. Come closer, and I will shoot you. The officers felt not only in danger, but also feared that their families and everyone else were at risk. The note confirmed the police's worst fears. The murderer was trying to divert suspicion from himself by using the word pigs in reference to the police. According to FBI experts, this almost certainly meant that Sonya's murderer worked for the police. Paul Sousa and Matt Owens, who were on duty the night of the murder, were flown to Anchorage to undergo a lie detector test. The officers began questioning Paul. The test results showed that he did not lie when asked questions like, "Did you kill Sonya Ivanoff? Did you shoot Sonya Ivanoff? Or did you pick up Sonya Ivanoff?" Sousa insisted that he was at the station writing the arrest report when Sonya was picked up. But the lie detector is not entirely reliable, and the officer could have deceived it. Barrow verified Paul's alibi by checking the login time on his work computer. The work on the document spanned about 40 minutes, and Paul was indeed at the station during that time. The login time showed that the man hadn't lied. When Sonya was seen in the police car, he was at the station. Paul was eventually cleared of the murder of Sonya Ivanoff. That left only Matt Owens, who did not show up for the lie detector test. In fact, he didn't even board the plane to Anchorage. Owens claimed he was still recovering from the shooting. After that, the officer's full attention turned to Matt. In analyzing the events, Barrow recalled that Owens had been at the center of the investigation the whole time. He took the missing person report, observed the crime scene, and was the one who found the stolen patrol car. At that moment, Barrow realized they had found the right man. He had no more doubts. On October 21st, 2.5 months after Sonya's disappearance, Matt Owens was arrested. The news spread like wildfire in Nome. When Sonya's mother learned that the police officer was the main suspect, she was stunned. She didn't want to believe it. The woman couldn't understand how someone they were supposed to trust could do something so terrible. When Owens was arrested, the phones at the police station rang non-stop with calls from frightened women in the area telling the same story. They all recounted how he offered them a ride, forced them into sexual intercourse in a patrol car, and then just dropped them off saying, "No one will believe a drunk woman anyway." It started with minor assaults. Owens picked up women he knew and had sex with them while he was on duty. Then he began using weapons and making threats. "If you don't do what I say, I will shoot." His contempt for women and his desire to gain power over them through violence became increasingly apparent. 6 women accused Owens of raping them over a period of 2 years, constantly threatening them with arrest. A chronology of events showed that the brutality and threats escalated each time. As the police recognized a pattern, they investigated the perpetrator's background. He was born and raised in Florida and had experienced his parents' divorce. Matt was about 6 years old at the time and initially lived with his mother. There were problems in the family, and his aunt and uncle offered for him to live with them in Nome. Owens liked Alaska and made friends there. But when he was a teenager, his father insisted that Matt move back to Florida and live with him. The contact between the two was not particularly close. Apparently, his father wasn't very interested in his son. After graduating high school, Matt returned to Nome and changed jobs. He became a dispatcher at the Nome police station, and after a year, he became a full-time officer. He liked that the police had control, and he enjoyed the admiration of the town's citizens. Barrow believed that it would soon come to a head, but there were some significant gaps in the case against Matt Owens. Local women said he always threatened them with his service weapon, a .45 caliber, and Sonya had been shot with a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol. Owens did not own a blue truck, and none of the patrol cars matched the blue paint or the tire tracks found at the crime scene. The police arrested the rapist, but there was no evidence that Matt Owens was the one who shot Sonya on the deserted road. The officers knew that a specific car had driven over a pool of blood on that road. That was the problem. They had to find that car. Then the officers thought, how many cars in Nome have exactly one tire different from the others? It should be easy to find. But ironically, there were many cars in Nome with these tires. A forensic scientist made it his mission to find the car. He drove to various parking lots and examined the tires. He managed to inspect almost every car in Nome. After examining countless cars, they found a blue truck whose color matched the paint on the branch and the tire tracks from the crime scene. However, this truck did not belong to Matt Owens, but to a local scrap dealer named Benjamin Naylor. It was his truck they were looking for, and it had exactly those tires and the right color that matched the shade on the branch. Benjamin Naylor claimed he had nothing to do with Sonya's murder. He told the police that he and his girlfriend lived outside the city and had come to Nome on August 12th to have lunch. Naylor said he even had proof. He had been in the restaurant and had the receipt for that day. As they drove home, his girlfriend asked him to stop so she could use the restroom. In a rural area, one can turn onto the nearest road to offer the woman a secluded spot in the bushes. That's exactly what they did. The deserted road he chose turned out to be the same road where Sonya's body had been found. He had passed her body twice since he drove into the dead end and back, but why hadn't he noticed her? The police couldn't believe what sounded like an impossible coincidence. The blood traces on the truck's tires had long since been wiped off, and since they knew exactly when Sonya had been killed, they couldn't prove that Naylor had killed her, only that his truck was at the crime scene. So Eric Barrow brought in Bill Gifford, a specialist in crime reconstruction. Bill looked at the photos from the crime scene and realized that Sonya's body had been hit by rain while she lay in the bushes. This could be deduced from the fallen leaves. On the night she disappeared, it had rained and the foliage stuck to the spots on her body. According to the National Weather Service, it rained on August 11th between 12 a.m. and 5 p.m., which means Sonya was already dead by that time. New evidence confirmed Naylor's statement that he had driven by 20 hours later. One piece of evidence was the pool of blood. It had already frozen when Naylor drove by, and the car had left a distinct track on the road. It matched the time on the restaurant receipt. In the end, it turned out that the tire tracks had nothing to do with the murder. It was an astonishing coincidence. Benjamin Naylor was cleared of all suspicion. The investigators turned their attention back to their main suspect, Matt Owens. It remained unclear where he was at the time of Sonya's murder. The officers continued to search for conclusive proof or physical evidence linking Matt to the murder of Sonya Ivanoff. But at that point, they only had circumstantial evidence. A local woman came to the investigators' aid and revealed that she had met Matt Owens in the summer of that same year. A week after Sonya was found, he invited her on a hike in the mountains north of Nome. According to her, he burned something late into the night. The woman didn't think much of it until Owens was arrested. The police immediately went to the site. It was 113 kilometers north of Nome on a road called Kogarok Road, where there were cabins right by the roadside. The officers hoped for a miracle. The chance of finding something was 1 in a million. The officers literally dug into the fire pit, and they were successful. From the ashes, they retrieved the remains of the missing belt, Sonya's bra, and boots. While further sifting through the ashes, the officers found new evidence for burnt keys. 2 of them could not be identified, but the others were recognized. It turned out that one of the keys belonged to the mailbox of Matt Owens' uncle. The other belonged to a woman who claimed Matt had offered her a ride and then raped her. When the woman got out of the car, she dropped the key from her pocket, but didn't pick it up. She was so traumatized by the incident that the mere thought of speaking with Matt Owens terrified her. The investigators suspected that Owens found the key when he cleaned the patrol car after Sonya's murder. He didn't know where the key came from, but he rightly assumed it belonged to one of the victims and that he had to eliminate all evidence. This brought all the facts together and connected Matt to the murder of Sonya Ivanoff. With the help of a team of investigative experts who unearthed evidence, the police reconstructed the events of that night. On August 11th, Sonya was walking down the street when Owens pulled up beside her. He possibly offered her intimacy or something else, which she refused and wanted to get out of the car. Sonya was not drunk. She was respected in the community. She had a good reputation. Matt realized he could have a problem. She could tell, and people would believe her. He knew his career would be over if she revealed it. This also explained the bruises on the left side of her face and chest. He had forcibly prevented her from leaving the car. Matt was prepared. Sonya was shot with a .22 caliber pistol, which meant the weapon was already in the car. Since Owens was a weapons expert, he had access to all kinds of firearms. Perhaps he had long wondered if he could pull it off and prove he was smarter than everyone else. The officers were all sure that Matt would kill again. If they missed him, it would be more difficult to catch him. Owens already knew how to make evidence disappear, and he had gained experience in exactly these investigations. It was much easier for him to erase his tracks. He had killed the 19-year-old Sonya for nothing, just to see if he could get away with it. In December 2005, former police officer Matt Owens stood trial. He was found guilty of the murder of Sonya Ivanoff and sentenced to 101 years in prison. In 2007, the state of Alaska passed the Sonya Ivanoff Law, which provides for the maximum penalty for a police officer convicted of murder while on duty. Thank you for watching, and take care.